I'm Teresa St. Angelo. I'm the director of the Winters Heritage House Museum. This is the H.U. Coble House, which is part of the museum. Our museum is next door, for those of you that don't know, and it consists of two 1760s original log cabins. And the Coble House is also part of the museum. We're happy to see all these wonderful faces, and today we have Nelson Polite and the African American Heritage of Downtown, his program is the African American Heritage of Downtown Lancaster, featuring the Underground Railroad. How exciting is this? And I was telling Nelson, I was on the streets of Lancaster, and I heard this wonderful voice. And I turned around, and it was Nelson giving a tour down in Lancaster. And it was wonderful. You had a spellbound audience, too. So we're happy to have you. And then, Sylvia, would you like to tell a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm the tour coordinator for the African American Historical Society of South Central Pennsylvania, and I also help out with the tours. And I want to point out we have two premier tour conductors right here in our audience today, and we are very thankful to have them with us today as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And with that, let's get on with the show.
I'm going to get us started out today. This walking tour is organized according to geography normally, but since we put it in slideshow format, we could rearrange it so it's chronological. Okay, so especially you two might be interested to see the order in which we do the sites. So it's more or less chronological, but whichever way we do the tour, we always begin here in either case. And this is Penn Square in downtown Lancaster. And I'm going to talk about the witness stones. So this particular square or corner of Penn Square was the in-home residence of Edward Hand. And that's our first site. So what we want to begin by saying is, I'm going to quote Dr. Leroy Hopkins, who was here last week. And he said that slavery was dehumanizing both to the enslaved and the enslaver alike. And there was quite a bit of slavery practiced in Lancaster throughout the 18th century and into the 19th century until about 1840. And it was practiced among the elite families of Lancaster. I myself am descended from one of those families, the Musser family, who owned that entire stretch of land in the southeast, going all the way to the Conestoga. And so not only was slavery practiced in Lancaster, but there was also a strong pro-slavery attitude. And part of the reason for that is throughout this entire tour, we need to think about Lancaster as being part of a border zone between southern, south central Pennsylvania and Maryland and Virginia. And so the elites of Lancaster had political, social, and especially economic ties with the elites in Maryland. And so that drove a certain pro-slavery attitude. And then the elites are able to sort of control the narrative in a community. They control the newspapers, churches, social institutions, and so they could drive a sort of pro-slavery attitude in Lancaster. So the Witness Stones is a project that began in Connecticut, designed to honor the humanity of those who were enslaved in northern states. Because a lot of times it's not even known that there was slavery in the North. When we look at racism in general, we kind of say that in the southern states it's overt racism, slavery, Jim Crow. It's like very obvious, whereas in the North sometimes it's more covert. It's not as obvious. And even in the fact that slavery was hidden in northern states, is part of that covert approach to it. So the Witness Stones program is designed to reveal that history and to honor the humanity and dignity and contributions of those who were enslaved. Lancaster is the first city in Pennsylvania to have the Witness Stones project. And part of what makes it very special is the involvement of high school students. As you can see here, these are the first Witness Stones that were planted there in Penn Square. So high school students, McCaskey High School, they are given the primary source documents to research the lives of those who were enslaved. And then they present that at a public ceremony, their findings. They give speeches in public about this. And you would be amazed to see how well these high school students do. It's very, very heartwarming to see their command of this history and the ability to present it to the public. And then the stones are implanted in the ground. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these three individuals here. So this was the in-house home of General Edward Hand. I want you to imagine back to that July of 1776, and the Declaration of Independence has just been signed. And immediately, Edward Hand is going up to New York for the first battle of the Revolutionary War up there on Long Island, preparing for battle, the first one. It's still that same July. And he takes time out from preparing for battle to go and purchase two Africans there on Long Island. And one of them was a boy named Robert, who was only 11 years old. Now, when we read narratives of those who were enslaved and then who wrote about what it was like to be enslaved, a very, very consistent message comes across, and that is that of all of the horrors of slavery, the absolute worst and the most dreaded was family separation, and especially the separation of children from parents. It was the most dreaded thing. And so here we have it. Within weeks of the Declaration being signed, Edward Hand is purchasing a young boy, 11 years old, and taking him from his home on Long Island. He was working on battle fortifications for a while, then he was sent to New Jersey and then back to Lancaster to serve the household. He also enslaved a woman named Susan, who was about 20 years old in Long Island, and sent her back to help in the household in Lancaster. A couple of years later, she tried to escape. She was pregnant, and it's believed that she was trying to get back to her home in Long Island. She knew because of the Gradual Abolition Act, her baby would be born before 1780, and so her baby would also be a slave for life. And so we think that she was probably trying to save herself and her unborn child going back to Long Island. She made it about 4 months, and then she was captured and sent to the workhouse in Philadelphia, workhouse. And she delivered the baby there, but it was a breech birth, and they didn't have the medical know-how, and the baby died tragically, and Susan was just sent back to be enslaved in the Hand household. So Susan's story is very, very tragic, but we also like to honor her humanity, her dignity, and her courage for making that effort to escape with her and her unborn child to get to freedom and to recognize what she did. The third person is Bet, and she was also a little girl, only 10 years old, who was enslaved in the Hand household. So with this, I will turn it over to Nelson to pick it up with Holy Trinity.
Here?
Oh, yeah, podium.
Oh, you mean, to stand here. Okay. Didn't realize that. Holy Trinity in Lancaster is the oldest church in Lancaster, dating back to 1730. And it was initially a German population in terms of their congregation. They spoke German for many, many years. In fact, they were the first, even those who were Africans that went to that church, they spoke German also and understood that. Trinity Lutheran has been on the forefront for the African and the African American since its inception. Their history, they were the first ones who spoke against slavery from the pulpit, but yet their history is a little complicated also. I'll use the word complicated. I say that because the balcony, you've seen balconies in churches, right? Well, they built the balcony because that's where those who were enslaved sat during that period of time. But yet they spoke out against enslavement. Crotto, Reverend Crotto was the first one who spoke from the pulpit against slavery. Also, they had a meeting at the church, and out of that conference, they decided to write a letter to Abraham Lincoln. So they took the letter, hand-delivered it to him, stating their views against enslavement. Christian Endress in 1821, Bethel Church chose to have him speak at their dedication service when they dedicated Bethel AME. The Africans came out of St. James Church, formulated their own church, and initially they had to get permission because at that particular time the Africans couldn't congregate without permission. However, they got the financial backing, not from the church that they came out of, but from Trinity Lutheran Church, and that's why they chose Christian Endress. So they've done and even till today, in fact, this Friday, they're going to have the Martin Luther King scholarship for high school students. And a lot of those high school students are of color, and they will get scholarships to go to school. So they've been on the forefront and done. We have a location there ourselves, our society. We have a place there where we store our goods, and so they've been great partners for us. As you can see here, the road lily. And the road lily, this is portrayed on the stained glass window at Bethel Church, but the road lily was a sign that represented a safe place to go. So for those who were seeking their freedom, and they saw that sign either on a quilt or wherever they might have saw it, that meant that that was a safe place for them to go. We talked about St. James Church. I think you can kind of go over St. James Church.
So the second historical church on our tour is St. James. They're both very, very old churches in Lancaster. And again, Bethel AME Church came technically out of St. James Church, and that was organized by James Clendenin, a very successful African-American entrepreneur. He had a window glazing business, very successful, and he could navigate the world of St. James and in order to get them to agree to formulate this new African church. You can see in the case of St. James, the pew chart still exists in their archive, where you can see the segregated seating. And so that, no doubt, was one of the reasons why the African members did want their own church, that they wouldn't have to have the degradation, sort of the dehumanization of that separated seating. Another major member was Major Thomas Bode, who was a Revolutionary War general. He ended up moving to Columbia and starting a lumber business. And as an indentured servant, or what we call term slavery, he had Stephen Smith, who came to him from Harrisburg as a young boy. And eventually Stephen Smith was brilliant and very talented, and he was able to acquire that lumber business after the death of Thomas Bode, and went on to become the richest black man east of the Mississippi. All right? And we'll talk more about him a little bit later. But just so that you know that his connection goes back through St. James, through Thomas Bode, who was a member there. Someone else that is of great prominence in the history of St. James is Dinah McIntyre. She was enslaved by Matthias Slough, who had the White Swan Hotel, which is right where the Marriott is now. He enslaved quite a few people working in his hotel. He acquired Dinah McIntyre when she was 57 years old in Maryland and brought her back to Lancaster. Now, she was what they called at the time a fortune teller. That was the term they had for it. But there's no doubt, and given that time frame, that she would have been practicing traditional African spirituality, dealing with the entire spiritual, physical, emotional well-being of people. And she was very good at it. And so she was able to develop her own business doing that over time. And no doubt that at the age of 57, that could be part of the reason why Matthias Slough was attracted to her and brought her up to work for him. Well, eventually she had money, she had her freedom, she owned property, she owned a place at the top of Vine and Strawberry in Lancaster. And when she died, normally women, no woman at all would ever have an obituary in the paper at that time, but Dinah McIntyre did. And her obituary was 3 times longer than that of Matthias Slough, right? So that kind of shows you that how, prominent she was. Her obituary said that up until the last few weeks of her life, she was still traveling all around Lancaster with her friends and acquaintances and customers, and she was just very, very, she went and pushed it to the end. She died at age 113, wow. Incredibly. And so we don't know the precise place of her burial, but it is believed she is buried in this zone of the cemetery that you see here. And we're still hoping that we will find records showing exactly where she is. And this was where her property was. And there's a little monument there right now on the top of Strawberry Street. Also, Louisa Wells is buried there. She was a servant for one of the rectors at St. James, and so she was buried in the area where all the rectors are buried in St. James. And her tombstone says she did what she could.
They did an excellent job with that. They put a lot of money into it, but they packed a lot of information into a relatively small space. So they definitely transformed this. But anyhow, this is where when he came to Lancaster, Thaddeus Stevens, this is where he lived and also practiced law. And he also lived there with his nephew, Hamilton Smith, and her 2 sons. What I want to say about Thaddeus Stevens is I was always curious about, why he was able to think the way he thought at that particular time. And that he was always on the side of the African and the African American. So just looking back in his background a little bit, he was born in Vermont, and he was born on a farm, and he was one of 4 children, a mother and a father, and they were farmers. But the father was alcoholic, and he also was abusive, and then eventually he abandoned the family. So when he did abandon the family, they were extremely poor. So he grew up in a kind of abusive, alcoholic kind of situation, and then also he was poor, so he knew that. Once again, the African at that time was in an abusive situation and poor. Not only that, he had a club foot, and his brother had 2 club feet. His brother went on to be a physician, and Thaddeus Stevens went on to be a lawyer. And the mother knew that they couldn't work on the farm, so they pushed them towards the educational route. He went to Gettysburg, practiced there, and as a young lawyer, he took on a case. He took on a case, the Delapaine case. And Delapaine was the slave master, looking for his property, which was Charity Butler. So Charity Butler at that time had 2 children and a husband in the state of Pennsylvania. And if you were in Pennsylvania for 6 months and a day, you were considered to be free. So when they went in front of the judge basically said continuous. And really what that meant, he said that she wasn't continuously for 6 months and a day in the state of Pennsylvania. Yet she had a husband and 2 children in Pennsylvania. So, but then needless to say, she lost the case and Thaddeus Stevens won the case. So as they were walking out of the courtroom, Charity Butler, she gave him a look that he said that he would never forget. And you know, I'm quite sure you've given that look to your children. You probably got it yourself. You know what that look is. You don't forget that look, and you know what it says without even saying much. Well, he took that in, and he vowed once again not to represent anyone against their freedom again. So that was another experience that he had to move him closer to becoming the man that he became. And then alongside Lilia Hamilton Smith, she was his confidant, and I always like the word gatekeeper, because she kept things together for him. So much so that in his latter days, at least the last 6 to 8 years of his life, she was the one, and through her nursing ability, to keep him alive. And that was extremely important because at that particular time, the 13th and the 14th Amendment was being formulated. And then also some of the groundwork for the 15th Amendment in later years after he passed. So I always think about that because if he would have died, he was the chief engineer of that. He pushed Lincoln, to do that, and those who were in Washington. Then perhaps we wouldn't have had the 13th or the 14th Amendment. And what would the United States look like? Then we'd be back at least 100 years, okay? So she was extremely important, and Sylvie will tell the rest of her story.
Yes. She did grow up in Gettysburg. She came to Lancaster to work for Thaddeus Stevens, and he supported her entirely. She was what we would call mulatto. She had a white father and an African mother, and so Stevens supported her, but no doubt she also influenced him greatly as well in his views. But she began to acquire property, and this was her property here. It's right on Vine Street, and it was a boarding house for women. So it was an income property for her, and the first of several that she acquired over the years. And I thought it was interesting that it was a boarding house for women, and that she's also trying to support other women and having independence. She had a significant boarding house in Washington, D.C. even, and she traveled back and forth. And it was said that she could inhabit the highest levels of the social circles, including the White House. Because back then for women in the 19th century, there were strict social rules, as you may know, exactly how to dress, exactly how to, conduct yourself in these receptions and dinners. And they said that she did all of that perfectly and with grace, and she could navigate any social scenario.
The Freedom Spies. This operation was included, 4 individuals with 1, 2, 3 locations. Lancaster County, and you'll hear this general theme, was a border state for slave states. So many slave catchers came to get their so-called property in the state of Pennsylvania. George Hughes was considered to be a notorious slave catcher. And he would come to town, and where the LNP, Lancaster newspaper building, was on King Street, West King Street. He would come there and meet Edward Ralph and present the material to Edward Ralph. He would present that material because George Hughes was illiterate. He could not read. Well, Edward Ralph, who was born up in Jim Thorpe, PA. I mean, people know about Jim Thorpe. Yeah. He would read the material. And then Robert Boston was a hairdresser, barber, as we know it nowadays, was located right there at the square where the Fulton Bank is at. So he would give him the information, and Robert Boston would give the information just down the street on Queen Street, South Queen Street, to Thaddeus Stevens. And so George Hughes would go back to his location, Maryland, empty-handed. So that was the spy operation of downtown at that particular time. Bethel AME Church. I guess you can talk a little bit about the cemetery. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And we include Bethel AME Church. It isn't normally on this tour, but Robert Boston was connected with it as the minister. So that's why, since we can do it on the slideshow, just a little bit, Bethel being founded in 1817, we mentioned that already. And the cemetery, there are 300 people buried there. Not all of them have tombstones remaining, but there are records for the people who were buried there. There are Civil War veterans buried there, United States colored troops buried there, and also ordinary people. And we sometimes like to tell the stories of ordinary, regular, sort of everyday hero people that are buried in cemeteries. And so we talk about Uncle John. He was a hod carrier. And Lancaster is a city of brick, and to build a brick building, you need to have a hod, a bin full of bricks for the bricklayer to take them out. So the hod carrier, that was a tough job and a dangerous job, climbing up, scaffolding, ladders. Uncle John was working on the Demuth building on King Street with his hod. Sure enough, it all comes tumbling down. He falls head first into the sidewalk on King Street, dented the sidewalk. But he got up with his full mental faculties for the rest of his life. No problem. And so he was kind of a hero for that, and he was known for it and remembered for it. And people could look at the dent in the sidewalk and say, Uncle John, right there. So it's sort of an everyday person, but had his own little story, heroic story, and we know that from his obituary. Okay.
Downtown.
Downtown train station.
Right. Lancaster had a railroad that ran between, Queen Street? Yeah, just off of Chestnut. They had a railroad station there at that particular time, back in the 1840s and 50s. And we note that railroad station because we cite Stephen Smith. That was the railroad that he used to carry those who were seeking their freedom, along with William Whipper. We talked about Stephen Smith and William Whipper and how wealthy he was, but he also used his power and his money to help those seeking their freedom in Columbia. So they carried coal on the cars. They probably bought at least 13 to 25 cars between he and William Whipper. And but on some of the cars, they had a false side or false bottoms, and they carried Africans and carried them on their way to freedom. and that train went from Philadelphia, from Columbia to Philadelphia, and at that time it took 8 hours, and that was considered to be lightning speed at that time. Yeah. So the Fulton has underneath it is the foundation of the workhouse. Okay, and on this foundation, as you can see, there's a marker there. We'll talk about the reason why that marker is there. That is the 1763 Indians who were massacred in the jail at that particular time. It was probably about 20 of them that were massacred there. They were housed in the jail for safety, but yet those so-called Paxton boys from the Harrisburg area came down to slaughter them. Yeah. Daredevil Dave Miller, he was the sheriff of the town and lived right next to the workhouse, right next to the jail. And he was against two things: enslavement and also the death penalty. And you could almost say they were kind of one and the same. But Daredevil Dave Miller was a horseman, very flamboyant. He was noted to ride his horse up into the courthouse to deliver mail. So, and also he rode his horse to break up the so-called riots up in the Columbia area. Well, once again, it's the same story as the slave catcher coming into the state of Pennsylvania, into Lancaster County, seeking these two women. And they actually caught these two women, right? So they caught them, they said, okay, we'll catch them, we got them, and we'll take them back in the morning. So they housed them in the workhouse. And of course, Daredevil Dave Miller got word of that. He was a sheriff. And somehow it was made for them to escape, whether it's through the keys or the door open. But anyhow, they escaped, and they escaped and went on down to the Gibbons farm and then went on their way. So that's the story about Daredevil Dave Miller. Lady Liberty, who is she? She sits on the top of the courthouse, and on sometimes you'll see her with a veil over her face, but you always see her with the scales. And what it is, it's an ancient African symbol and tradition. And it goes back to, on one side, at the end of your life, is the feather of truth weighed against your heart. So I always say, keep your heart light as the feather of truth. So live your life accordingly, and all will be well. The courthouse, just 3 years before Thaddeus Stevens passed in 1865, he stood on these courthouse steps, and he talked about 40 acres and a mule. Now, he didn't directly talk about that, but he alluded to that. And basically the specifics about that was in 1865, after the Civil War, and after slavery was abolished, what are we going to do with 4 million Africans? And you know, his ideal was, well, they've been enslaved for 252 years and working the land and all types of abuse. and what are you going to do with them? So he decided that, well, perhaps we could give them land of the slave owners, some of the plantations that they worked on for many years. So that was proposed. Of course, that never really happened because the North won the war, right? But the South won the narrative. The real issue is, both the North and the South were pro-slavery, and the Civil War was fought not over slavery, but who was going to profit from slavery. That's what it was fought over. It was fought over the profits out of enslavement. And that theme continues today, So we look here and we talk about being equal, and equal sounds very good, sounds very polite, sounds like the right thing to do. Yeah, let's make this thing equal. Well, that really won't work. Equity works best in this situation because we're not starting from the same starting point. We're 250 years back of enslavement in comparison to our counterparts. So we'll move towards equity and not equal. Abraham Maxwell. Abraham Maxwell was the market master of the oldest market in this country, downtown Lancaster. And he was an upstanding citizen, well known in both the white community and black. He was a Civil War veteran. He was a musician. He was pallbearer at Lillian Hamilton Smith's funeral. So he was well invested into the community of Lancaster, and especially the black community. Well, the mayor, person who was running mayor, Rosenmiller, was running for mayor, and he needed the black vote. Nothing new under the sun, right? You heard that before. So he solicited upstanding citizen Abraham Maxwell. And he delivered. He got the vote. The mayor won the election, so he appointed him to be the market master at that particular time. And that's how that happened. Thaddeus Henry had his barbershop on King Street, East King Street. Left-hand side, the Fulton Bank, they own those buildings there. So there's a marker there. And they pay for the marker, but that's where his barbershop was. And his story is that he came here with his uncle, Ben Simmons, from Philadelphia. He was taught the trade of barbering, and then his uncle went back to Philadelphia, and he stayed in Lancaster and barbered for at least 40 years. Once again, he was the same type of individual as Abraham Maxwell, upstanding citizen, and he had also had a long obituary too at the time of his death. Probably his most two famous patrons were Thaddeus Stevens and James Buchanan. But I imagine they weren't in the shop at the same time. That's just my imagination, okay? Yeah. But he was a very fancy barber, did a bunch of different things, and well known. William Payne, this is his home, and it's right around the corner from the Hamilton Club. Guys heard of the Hamilton Club? Well, he was their chief chef there for, I think, about 16 years. And that's the original Hamilton Club. It used to be on Duke Street, North Duke Street, and then the other location is where they're at now, right on Duke and Orange Street. Yeah. So that was his home, but he also did a lot of catering. He catered throughout the city, Franklin and Marshall and other places. He was also a member of the Ebenezer Church, one of the founding members. So that was William Payne. Mm-hmm. The Elite Hotel, which is no longer there, was right next to the Yates Building on Queen Street, South Queen Street. And everything is tore down there now. They're going to build new high-rises there. But the Elite Hotel was owned by the Sanders. He and his wife owned that hotel. They ran the hotel from 1900 to about 1910. And then shortly after that, that kind of gave way to the Green Book. And I have a Green Book here. I'll show it to you. I have the 1947 Green Book. And back at that particular time, there were 5 homes in Lancaster that were featured in the Green Book. You guys know what the Green Book is and what it was for? You do? Okay. Yeah, it was just a safe place for those who were traveling, the African Americans who traveled, because you couldn't stop every place. I experienced that, and I'm quite sure you guys remember those days. I experienced that myself when the first time that I went down south. I went down south and we were going to, what was that city? It'll come to me. But anyhow, Winston-Salem. We were traveling down to Winston-Salem. And so I knew of the South, but I didn't know, I never experienced the South. So we got in the car, we kept riding, and we kept riding, we kept riding. You know, we ain't stopped nowhere. So then finally we did stop, and stopped on the side of the road, and just stretched our legs, ate our little sandwiches, got back in the car, and rode to our destination. And you know, that had an impact on me as a little kid, about how the South really was very segregated, and you just couldn't stop any place. Very few places that you could stop for anything. So that was my experience. But Hugo Green was the one who started the Green Book, and 540 North Street is the only house that is standing that was in the Green Book back in that day. And 540 North Street just happens to be the home that I grew up in. Yeah. My grandfather, Abraham Polite, it was he and my grandmother's home. And I grew up in the home, but my father, Nelson Polite Sr., actually was born in that home, and we kept him there until he passed at age 92. Yeah. Baynard Rustin. Who was he? Anybody ever hear about him?
Yes, she did.
Where?
I used to live in Westchester.
Well,
There you go. How I know about it.
But you know what? Yeah, because even Westchester didn't recognize him
Not initially, right.
for many years. Yeah, because I lived in Westchester for a period of time. Yep, I lived on Madillac Street. You know where Madillac Street's at, right? You said,
Graduated from Westchester State.
wow. Okay, the college. Yeah, I forget what's that street? That's the main street.
High Street.
High Street. Yeah, right. I used to visit down there, visit the college down there. My buddy graduated from there. Yeah. But anyhow, but back in that day, they never talked about him. I never heard his name. But they've since named a high school after him, right? But Baynard Russell was really a man before his time in terms of his forward thinking. He was a member of the Friends organization, and I think they kind of he was raised around them. But he did make his way in 1950 to Lancaster. I always remember the date because that's the year I was born. In March of 1950, he came here to Lancaster, and the YWCA, that's where he spoke at. He spoke on those steps. And his speech was relevant to today. It was social inclusion, racial integration, and nuclear proliferation. Doesn't that sound familiar? You know, right now, we're in a situation right now where, you know, somebody said that they didn't care about anything except for a nuclear bomb, right? Nuclear capabilities. So we're still dealing with that. Not caring about you or me, but just so a group of people won't build a nuclear bomb. So that's just, I think we talk about history sometimes, but, some things are just still very so relevant because we have experienced some things and we got some information about some things, but we haven't learned some of the lessons that need to be learned from these situations that we experience. Baynard Russell was the chief architect and manager of the March on Washington. He did that. He's the one that organized all of that. Yeah. We don't hear about him because they kept him in the background because he was gay. That was his lifestyle. So, but he was very, very forward-thinking individual. Shriners Concord Cemetery. This is the last slide or no?
This is the last stop, yep.
Yeah. Is where, Thaddeus Stevens is buried. Now, he could have been buried in Vermont. That's where he was from. He could have been buried in Gettysburg. That's where he practiced for many years there. But he chose to be buried at that cemetery because at that time, that was the only cemetery in town that allowed anyone to be buried in. All the other cemeteries were segregated. So his body lied in the rotunda, and at that particular time, they were very picky about who was able to lie in the Capitol rotunda, and he was the third person to lie in the rotunda. Yep. And when he did do that, there was black soldiers that were around his casket, and that was part of his doing. He also was buried next to, just adjacent from Potter's Field in that cemetery. The Negro Civic League, they were right prior to the NAACP. They were a very, very powerful organization, so they would pay homage to him and march from either Bethel Church to his gravesite. And this is just one of the times that they went up there to pay tribute to him. So I think you can read the epitaph
Okay.
if you want to read it.
So this is what Stevens had put on his tombstone. I repose in this quiet and secluded spot, not for any natural preference for solitude, but finding other cemeteries limited as to race by charter rules. I have chosen this, that I might illustrate in my death the principles which I advocated through a long life, equality of man before his creator.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time. Yeah.
I can't thank you enough.
Sure.
That was wonderful, and I wanted to say, I was the teacher in residence out at the Library of Congress, and my service there was when the African American Museum opened.
Oh.
And so you couldn't get a ticket, to get in at all, but our director, we were in the educational outreach department, and our director got us tickets, we got in. And what a moving experience that was. Has anybody been able to go down to DC?
Yes, and I just want to say that the people who designed, the firm that designed that museum designed the Thaddeus Stevens Lydia Hamilton Center for Democracy in Lancaster.
Oh, wow, that's great to know.
And it's handicap accessible.
Oh, wow, because first of all, it's a beautiful building, number one, but I bring this up because we went and our department was only, the educational outreach was only like 8 people. And the museum's designed where it goes, spirals down, it was the most moving experience I ever had. The next day in the office, the director put up a paper, because when you use primary sources too, one of the first things you always say is, what do you see? And you'll write one word from a primary source. Anyway, the director, she put up a piece of paper, and she said, I just want one word. What was your experience like at that museum? And I have to say, I thought hard, long and hard. There were so many words going through my mind. What do I put on there? But I did put embarrassed. And, it was just my feeling from what I saw. And I thank you for bringing this history to us. I can't believe this. Marie says I cry about everything. But this is such, and I feel I'm embarrassed to say when I said this is exciting, the Underground Railroad, I don't mean it in terms of, I hope you understand what I mean. It's exciting to have you here and to bring this history to us and to keep this history alive and to see, understand what folks before us have gone through and where we need to go. And so I appreciate everything you've done, and it was just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure.
How about a nice big hand of applause? I don't know if you had questions. I'm sure they'll address. I did want to, I'm going to Hawk again, Thaddeus Stevens, so Ross Hedrick is coming up next Wednesday.
Okay.
And he'll be here at 1 o'clock as well as 6:30.
Okay.
And he's going to perform as he's going to dress as Thaddeus Stevens and present. So we are thrilled to have him do that. If you want to go on, it's a free event, and come to either time. And if you want to go on our website to make sure secure a spot, that would be great. And then we do have architectural tours now.
Okay.
And we're I'm hawking that too. But and again, we have a new staff member, Dr. Caitlin Obitz, and she's developed a wonderful architectural tour. And we even have Marie here who's gone on, and she could attest to the wonderful job that Caitlin did. So again, thank you so much bringing this history to us.
We have a couple more things too that I want to present.
Oh, okay, did I?
No.
Oh,
I'm just
okay.
saying, are there any questions? We'll do that first. Yes.
I'll scoot up.
Where could we access your tours that?
I have some rack cards with me, so as soon as we're done with the presentation, I'll.
Okay, that would be great, thank you.
Can I put a plug in for Lancaster? 3 of the stops on our downtown walking tour are acknowledged by the National Parks Underground Railroad Park. And they had to go through a lot of verification, primary sources, to be considered part of the National Underground Railroad Park.
Wonderful.
You talked about some spies.
Can hold these up,
checking
too.
on a slave retriever. Could you run through that again and tell us what happened when Thaddeus Stevens found out what the spies were?
Yes. Just a second. Okay. The spy operation, you had, including the slave catcher, Edward Ralph, and Robert Boston, who was the barber, and he was involved with the black community. He had a barber shop right downtown where the Fulton Bank is at, where he would notify Thaddeus Stevens' location where he lived at on Queen Street, and they would hide those persons in a sistrum. There's a sistrum underneath there, and those who were enslaved would be hidden there. Yep. Mm-hmm. That's part of the museum, and they still have that sistrum that they'll show you. Yep. And then they had connections with the Gibbons family, was on Route 30, and they would go to their, right off of Route 30, they would go to their farm, and they would take in many people there, only to go to the destination of probably Philadelphia. It was a safer place for those who were traveling to go to the larger cities for 2 reasons. Number one, they could disguise themselves in the larger cities, and number 2, they work. There was much more work there. You could get a job so you could earn a living, and so. Any other questions? Yes.
Not so much questions as comment. My husband's a black man who grew
Yeah.
up in South Carolina during
Yes.
Jim Crow.
Mm-hmm.
When you mentioned the Green Book, it reminded me that even today, if he travels south, he would not travel without his birth certificate with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ID. Yes. Yeah. That goes way back. Yeah, having to have ID to get from point A to point B. Yeah, you had to have your so-called free papers when you travel as a black person, and yeah. So that's.
It's still there.
It's still there. And then I've also seen it inside the prisons, that they have a system inside the prisons where you have to have a pass to go from point A to point B. And of course, you know, the African American is disproportionately incarcerated in this country. So you see them, especially in the state prison, well, either one, state or federal. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think what you're kind of alluding to is certain behaviors, certain movements, how I conduct myself, and up till today, you know, in the world that we live in here. I mentioned my early history of my experience in the South. So, you know, we move differently than other populations move in this world that we live in. Yeah, we move a little bit different because we have to. Yeah. If not, there's consequences. You know, and I say in particular, you know, black men. I mean, men or women, either one, but particularly black men. Any other comments, questions?
Just to piggyback on that, I was a teacher and one of my aides was black and we were very good friends and her son was, you know, the same age as my middle son. And Gerard went off to college. He went to study architecture and he came home for break and Karen, his mom, said to me, I told him he has to be home at 11 o'clock. And I'm like, Karen, 11 o'clock? That's awfully early. And she looked at me and she said, Teresa. And she just gave me that look that I had never realized before. Here, my son, the same age, can stay out till 2 in the morning, right? Her son has to be home because of what could possibly happen to him. And this is, you know, I can't believe I never even thought of that. And again, embarrassed.
Yeah, we gotta move a little bit different. My most recent experience, the latest one of many, obviously, was Somerset County. You know where that's at. Yeah, and most of it's out in nowhere land, so to speak. Yeah. Well, you know, I was actually lost in Somerset County. I was coming back from Kansas City. Yeah, Kansas City. Yeah. And this was in September, last September. And I got lost back in there. And I stopped to ask for directions. GPS is shaky back there. There's nothing back there, right? Except for a deer, which I hit. Or he hit me, either one, right? And so I asked the one lady, there was a guide and there was a lady sitting at the table at the convenience store. And then he went inside when I approached the car. And she told me at that particular time, she said, well, I asked her for directions, and then she said, well, you might not want to be around here too long because, yeah, this is like 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. And I understood exactly what she meant by that. She was a white woman. Yep, that's what she told me. Yeah. So I said, okay, get back in the car. Yeah. And that was in 2025. Yeah, it was September. That wasn't even a year ago. Yeah. So we just got to move different. Yeah. Any other questions?
I recently watched that program on women's suffrage, and you're kind of appalled at when women got the right to vote, and then I didn't realize that there was such a big gap before black women got the right to vote.
Yeah, and then just to tell the whole story, right? They actually the black women joined with the white women to get the right to vote after men did. They actually joined with them, right? They were walking shoulder to shoulder, right? So when the white women got the right to vote in 1920, they abandoned the black women at that time. Yeah, that's the whole story. They didn't help them, you know.
Brought out in this program.
Exactly, they didn't help them. Yeah. So that's the world that we live in.
Sad part.
Yeah.
Your history.
Well, the thing about it, I mean, even present day, you know, Donald Trump got 52% of white women's vote the first time he ran, and 53% the second time. So,
But 39% of registered voters stayed home and didn't even vote.
yeah. So, any other questions? Because I got just a couple things for you. Oh, there they are. Yeah. Whichever one you want to start with. What do you want to start with?
Well, let's start with living the experience.
Okay. Yeah, the living experience. It's a reenactment. You can take pictures of these too. It's at Bethel AME Church. It's a reenactment of the Underground Railroad. It's done every first Saturday at 11 o'clock. But once again, you can take pictures of these.
And that's a wonderful experience if you've never done it. You really, it's amazing that that's so close by us and that you can do it. You really want to go if you've not done that. Isn't it incredible?
We haven't done it yet.
That'll be right here. Frederick Douglass gave a speech, once again, talking about things that are relevant and irrelevant. This is still relevant. He gave a speech back in 1852 that continues to be relevant today. That's why we're going to read his speech for our celebration, so to speak, of our 250 years of this country. Of course, it's not 250 years for us. But anyhow, we'll read his speech. And what it is what is the 4th of July to the slave? Now, initially, the abolitionist auxiliary group in Rochester, New York, the Women's Auxiliary Group, they invited him to speak on the 4th of July. He refused because we weren't free in 1852. So he spoke on the 5th of July. So we're going to read his speech on the 5th of July, Bethel AME Church. Doors open at 1, speech starts at 2. Bethel AME Church on the 5th of July. Has anybody ever heard of the Cole Hannah Jones? No? 1619 Project? 1619? She's on the same caliber as her. Erica Armstrong Dunbar. She will be here in Lancaster at the, what do they call it now, the hotel? Holiday Inn Hotel on Chestnut Street in Lancaster. Our organization will sponsor her for our annual luncheon. It's October, I think it's the 24th. Yeah, October the 24th. So she wrote a book about George Washington, and George Washington had, enslaved people, but one enslaved woman that he had was Ona Judge, and Ona Judge escaped, and he pursued her relentlessly throughout the course of his presidency, but she was never caught. Hence, the title of the book is Never Caught. So that's what she's going to speak on.
And
And
then
then-
just the rack cards for the tours. So
You can talk about that.
Yeah, so the tours are the first and second Saturday of every month. We're in our walking tour season now. So you saw the sites on the slides, but to actually walk to the places and see them firsthand, to be there, is a very powerful experience. So I encourage you to take the tour if you're able to. So we have the downtown tour the first Saturday of every month at 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock. And then the southeast tour, and we're going to be coming back here in about a month to give the presentation on that tour. So please come back for that presentation. So that's the historically black neighborhood of Lancaster, the southeast tour, the second Saturday of every month. So I'll have these rack cards out here and you can help yourself.
Green Book, 1947 edition. You can look at that. And these are just some readings for your education, history about black folks and Reconstruction, okay? Which is the playbook to begin to fix the damage that was done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you got it up here, yeah. I forgot that you had that up here. Yeah, the green book.
Oh, right.
My name is Judy, and I have a quiz